I call the meeting to order. This is meeting number 33 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development. I would like to welcome Mr. Bob Benson, Mr. Brian Massey, and Ms. Emanuela Lambropoulos, who are substituting for respectively Robert Kitchen, Laurel Collins, and Terry Duguid. Today we are hearing witnesses on Mr. Massey's bill C-248 to create an Ojibwe National Urban Park of Canada. We don't do sound tests with the members, with the committee members who are on Zoom, so I'm going to assume that everyone has a headset that is up to the standard that has been set by the House of Commons. And as for the witnesses, well, our witnesses for the first hour are here, so they're not wearing headsets. But we'll do the test for the witnesses coming on to the second hour. Okay, so we have with us Mr. from Parks Canada, Mr. Andrew Campbell, Senior Vice President Operations, and Darlene Upton, Vice President Protected Areas Establishment and Conservation. You have in total 5 minutes. I don't know if you'll be splitting your time or not, but we'll do 5 minutes and then go into a couple of rounds of questions. So is it Ms. Upton who's speaking? Yeah. Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good day, bonjour. I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of Parks Canada. Let me begin by acknowledging I'm on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And the lands covered by Bill C-248 are in the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe people of the Three Fires Confederacy, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. I want to affirm that Parks Canada shares the same goal as the bill, the creation of Ojibwe National Urban Park. However, I would like to be clear that the Parks Canada-led work is separate from the process being proposed under Private Members Bill C-248, and Parks Canada's input was not sought in the development of the bill. There are some practical difficulties for Parks Canada that will be difficult to resolve. I want to begin by sharing a few key facts. The bill seeks to create a national urban park by amending the Canada National Parks Act, which is legislation that was never intended for that purpose. Unique legislation was created for the Rouge National Urban Park in Toronto for this very reason. The study area under discussion in the Parks Canada-led process is considerably larger than the boundaries outlined in this bill, and that is yet to be reconciled. If the bill is passed on day one, we will have no choice but to enforce the Canada National Parks Act. As such, any provincial or city infrastructure in the park will immediately become subject to our regulations. This will include everything from sewer lines to roadway allowances, which will create jurisdictional, liability, and legal issues that would normally be worked out through the Parks Canada-led work currently underway. And this is which this legislation does not take into account in its current form. Parks Canada is creating new national urban parks across the country, and in fact has been exploring the potential of urban park in Windsor since spring 2021, before this bill was tabled in the House. The proposed park is found in the traditional territory of both Caldwell and Walpole Island First Nations. Walpole Island First Nation is not represented by Caldwell First Nation to the best of our knowledge, and has not been engaged in the development of the bill to our knowledge. The duty to consult is a constitutional requirement and needs to begin before decisions are made. Parks Canada has engaged both First Nations at the beginning of our work, and our process includes both nations at the partnership table. We recognize and respect the rights of Indigenous peoples and are committed to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, including free, prior, and informed consent. This bill will essentially create an instant park by shortcutting around some important steps, leaving details to be worked out after the fact. It assumes a particular governance model by automatically transferring the administration, management, and control of the park to the federal government. Under our National Parks Program, Urban Park Program, we have the flexibility to consider partnership-based models, but the bill will not allow for that possibility in Windsor. The private members' bill is a new and unknown territory. No national park or national urban park to date has been created this way. Under normal processes, land transfers would be negotiated in advance. Fulsome and meaningful consultations would occur with Indigenous peoples, stakeholders, and the public, and the funding to operate the park would be secured. In the case of Windsor, none of those steps have been completed yet and are ongoing in our process. This means the path to implementing the bill is uncertain and many important questions remain unanswered. For example, who would be responsible for existing liabilities on lands? Who would be responsible for maintaining public infrastructure in the park? These questions are not dealt with through a management plan. They relate to the rights and legal obligations that, if not respected, can result in significant liability to the government. Parks Canada is committed to creating a national urban park in Windsor, and we're making rapid and significant progress, already working closely with other jurisdictions and Indigenous partners. Through our process, we will work with partners to add value to the existing parks and natural areas in Windsor, building on Parks Canada's successful record of accomplishment of creating parks from coast to coast to coast that Canadians hold dear. Thank you very much.
Pardon. Merci, Madame Upton. Alors, on poursuit avec le premier tour de questions et c'est Monsieur Deltel qui va commencer pour 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Salutations aux confrères collègues présents et Madame, Monsieur. Soyez les bienvenus.
Welcome to the House of Commons. Welcome.
Moment.
Can you hear me in English? Can you hear me in English if I speak to you in French? Yes? Everything's correct then? It's all set? Welcome. Welcome to the House of Commons, and thank you for your commitment to the bill and to Parks Canada. First of all, I'd like to know what the process is with respect to the recommendations that underlie a bill like this. What would be the economic and ecological spin-offs for the creation of a park like this?
On un processus qui commence avec
with a process that deals with all the partners around the table. We have 3 stages to explore all the subjects, like the boundaries, governance, and other things. The first part is pre-feasibility, where you hear the interests of all everyone, all parties, and those who wish to continue the project. After obtaining agreement from all partners, we continue with the studies to find key information to establish the park. And that could mean things dealing with ecology, the environment, the boundaries, licenses and leases that we would settle, and after that stage, we would really create the park and make the announcement. Well, first of all, congratulations, Madame, and thank you very much for your French, because it's very good. We certainly appreciate your speaking to us in French. But would you be opening a consultation? The reason why I asked the question is that the Indigenous community that is directly affected by this, everybody has heard, are you asking for the dialogue, or do they have to show the interest? Well, it is at the beginning of the project. We met with the Indigenous communities to see whether or not they had any interest. We will listen to them now, and we will explain the process in terms also of money. But my colleagues can also speak to this issue as to what has been done and the process. The 2 Indigenous nations that are right beside the park, Walpole First Nation and Caldwell, are the 2 that we already have relations with because of the park, and that is one thing. But these really are the two who have rights over that land, and that's why it is necessary to have the two groups in consultation. Yes, precisely. That's where I was heading in my riding. I represent the Wandake Huron Nation that I have been representing here for 7 years or so. But we know that land claims is an issue, are an issue that is very, very delicate here in Canada. It's very clear that it is between nations. They have different ways of seeing the claims. So how you as Canada, how will you deal with the situation where one nation asks for the creation of a park, but there are two other nations from the same area that would not necessarily want the same thing? How will you deal with that? Well, we have almost all through the country. Well, I didn't dare say that, but it can be interesting for the Rouge National Urban National Park. We had some 7 territories, and part was the Wandake as well, because they did have some issues there in that region. So that is why it is always preferable to have all the groups together and to have a parks management and to have a business plan for each park. We have the agreement of the groups. They are working together. Sometimes there are issues amongst themselves. But really, generally, relations that are created are very good. And for the recovery process, it does take time. You have to create relations, and you have to be patient and wait. Sometimes it takes a long time, but very often we have co-management, and it goes there. I'm going to make 2 observations. It's a delicate situation, I know, but it is within the ambit of the federal government to deal with this. But any project, to my mind, that deals with it, there has to be a contribution from the Indigenous peoples. And thank you very much, Mr. Campbell, my second thought, for your contribution to this. Thank you, Mr. Deltel. Madame Thompson, now.
Madam Thompson.
Sorry, my apologies. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Park Canada as the witness. If I could begin by referencing the legislation, and this bill is using legislation for the creation of national parks or national park reserve in order to establish a national urban park. Does Park Canada have any concerns about creating a national urban park using this legislation?
Yes. So first of all, again, sorry, we just lost the member. I don't know. Okay. Just on a couple of fronts is one, unequivocally Parks Canada supports the creation of a national urban park in the Windsor area. So I don't want to mix those two things together. The current legislation, a couple of and I'll just deal with from the land perspective and then maybe turn to Darlene to touch on a couple of other pieces. But from the land perspective, under the current act and how it is coming forward, the Government of Canada and Parks Canada must hold clear title to the land. No title work to date has been done on the lands, as far as we know, that are being put forward. So that would be something that the committee would want to look at. And in fact, clear title, being able to have clear title, both surface and subsurface. And with that, one of the things that comes with that is all of the liabilities of that land. The second piece just around that is when you look at the borders and Darlene did mention this, anything that is subsurface that is already pre-existing, you would be under this moving that into the control of the national park. So if there was a sewer line that the City of Windsor had that was going through that, it would now come under the care and control of Parks Canada, and all of the existing federal legislation would come into effect on that piece of infrastructure. The other is because there are some major streets and the parkway that goes through that area of Windsor, you would also have both the city and the province that if they wanted to do any changes to that, there is no buffer zone allowed. And to take land out of a national park would create an order in council, and you would have to show net ecological benefit for being able to do that, which is not a bad thing. It's just a very difficult thing in an urban park, and why we move forward with separate legislation with the creation of the Rouge National Urban Park.
That's fine.
So thank you. Ms. Upton, did you have something you wanted to add to that? If not, I'm pleased to go to the next question.
No, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. So again, to either of you, Parks Canada has the authority to create national urban parks without using legislation. Can you explain this approach to the committee, please?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we have the authority to create national urban parks just with our existing authorities under the Canada Agency Act. We can receive land, we can administer land. And so the option and the way in which we've been looking at the National Urban Parks program is innovative in that we're looking at the potential for multi-jurisdictional ownership and partnerships and a path forward that wouldn't necessarily require Parks Canada to own the land. As such, we've been considering using a non-legislative approach, so a policy approach to designate national urban parks, and they would confer protections through a variety of means, federal legislation, we could still use provincial, municipal bylaws, et cetera, and that would all be worked out in the development. And there are a lot of benefits to doing it that way, at least initially. We are running a national program, and so we're learning a lot as we're negotiating in discussions with several cities across Canada about their interests. And so that is not to say that there could not be eventually legislation that's developed specific for national urban parks, similar to what was done in the Rouge. But at this point, we would like more time in order to further the program and to understand what the other parks will look like so we can make the best decisions around potential future urban parks legislation.
You're on mute, Mr.
Sorry, it's easier being in the room. Ms. Upton, if I could go back to a comment that you made in your opening remarks around the around Parks Canada's duty to consult. What more is required from Parks Canada in order to discharge the Crown's duty to consult?
So the National Urban Parks program has three goals. So one is for the conservation, to protect important, ecological areas in Canada, and there's a lot of biodiversity that sits in southern Canada in these urban areas. So that's very important. The second one is to connect Canadians to nature and bring nature to where Canadians live. 82% of Canadians are urban. And our third goal is to support reconciliation, and that will be defined by our partners. And so we have a partnership committee. We have our partners at the table now, and we're starting to work through the process to understand what their vision for reconciliation could be around that. That could be co-management. It could be ceremonial space. It could be opportunities for businesses. It could be opportunities to share their culture with the public. And so that is, for us to meaningfully consult, we require the time to have those conversations, to understand that vision, and for those decisions to be made cooperatively.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll have to stop there, yeah. Madame Pouzy.
Oui, alors merci.
Yes, thank you very much. I think I will do like my colleague Gérard Deltel. I want to congratulate you on your French. From what I have learned, Parks Canada is insisting on the connectivity, the environmental connectivity, because there will be roads that will be bisecting the park. And that is of interest to me because that has been my experience in my riding. So what are you going to do to improve this environmental connectivity when you have these roads passing through? This is something that it requires a great deal of expertise, perhaps the most in the world. Parks Canada has overpasses and underpasses that are used very often by us to create this connectivity. And normally studies are carried out on the routes or the paths that are most used in nature. So to do so, we use the two types of structures to ensure that there is connectivity that is preserved. And this is something that is very fundamental in our terms of reference. We want to preserve that environmental movement. Thank you. Last question. What then would be the advantages of having a national urban park rather than having a provincial park? In that we certainly move towards provincial or municipal parks rather more than a federal park. So what is the advantage to having a national urban park? Well, I think there are several advantages. But I think that Parks Canada brand is one that is a very proud one here in Canada. We have very good figures to demonstrate the economic benefits for our parks. And I believe that with our system of urban parks, we can add a great deal to local economies, but at the same time, we can protect biodiversity, which is very important. Also, very often in urban parks, there are 1 or 2, 3 goals, but national parks have 3 objectives, and that is the goal: to protect, to connect, and to reconcile. That is a little bit different from other parks. And finally, probably we've heard a number of times from our Indigenous partners that it is a nation-to-nation relationship, which is very important for them to have that type of relationship. A part of it is at the basis of all the parks that have been created in the last 20 years or so, I guess. Well, I listened to your answers, and another question comes to mind. With the bill, if it is passed, there are new things, that is what I understand, that could be there. Would that have a snowball effect on other parks in other provinces, like, say, Quebec? Are there things that could be used or done by Quebec? From time to time, with the province of Quebec, with Saguenay, Saint-Laurent, Parc Morin, we have a structure to have mirror legislation between the province of Quebec and Canada, and that can create a very, very close partnership. There also can be Indigenous communities that are part of that, and communities where, say, small villages all through that region that also have partners in Canada. But this is another type of a very special and unique legislation that we have. Thank you very much, Chair. I will give the rest of my time to Mr. Mass.
Thank you. Thank you to my colleague, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for our witnesses being here and your wonderful work across Canada and for our area as well, too. I want to assure you, just so you know, you haven't here, you weren't consulted for the bill. That's not the normal process to go formally to a department to do that. We use the Library of Parliament, and their lawyers are experts and so forth. And I can assure you, I actually did talk to many Parks Canada staff, some in Windsor and some other places, who actually gave me a lot of advice, especially learning about the ecological hotspot that we have here. And that's what actually formed us to bring the bill to the Library of Parliament to do that. So it wasn't out of a spite that we didn't contact management or whatever. We talked to many Parks Canada staff, including those in Point Pelee and others, to get their professional opinions. I also want to assure you that as well, too, the bill you noticed, yes, you were working on some type of a plan, and I understand your plan is still a draft plan right now. Is that correct? That's on your website? It's still a draft plan, your plan?
That's correct. We're consulting on it now.
Okay, so you're in a draft plan right now. So I mean, so when we tabled this bill, would you not agree, though, that before this bill there was a large movement in the Windsor-Essex County area to have a national urban park even before your efforts?
Oh, yes, of course, we do commend all the work you've done. Like, we share the same goal, and this is a different process, and ultimately, we're going to implement the direction of the government.
Yeah. So, but you mentioned in your last thing there, you might actually end up with legislation. So we would have to then put this in hiatus for a long time. And I guess what I want to make sure there's clear is that none of this takes place until actually the Prime Minister and the finished deal is done. So there's lots of time to do for some of these things that need to be done in the time being, because you might end up with legislation, which I have right here. Is that correct that you just said that earlier?
We would be looking at your bill proposes to have, sorry, Mr. Chair, the bill proposes to have establish this park under the National Parks Act. Our consideration of legislation may be specific national urban parks legislation. So that's the difference. But
yeah, but in the meantime, we have over 200. You didn't mention about the species and the at-risk there. And this park here is the other parks that you're talking about. This one only has right now proposed in its geography public lands that are actually parks themselves, except for the only federal land, which is unprotected right now. Did you secure the protection of that Ojibwe Shores land? Is that actually permanently protected now? Is Ojibwe Shores permanently protected?
So we've signed an MOU, and we hope to have that permanently protected probably spring of 2023. We're working through the deal for that right now.
Okay, so that's been several years in the making, and that actually has 200 endangered species on it. So, but you're saying that an MOU, a memo of understanding, is binding and is going to happen no matter what?
That is the intention, yes.
No, that's the intent. You're saying it's tension, so the answer is no then. So the MOU, so we're guaranteed, no matter flat out right now, we're going to protect Ojibwe Shores.
That commitment has been made, yes.
That's a commitment. Are you? So it's guaranteed. You're saying guaranteed then.
We are in the process. There is some land swaps that have to occur to make that happen, and we're on track and hoping to have that completed and that land protected by March 2023. Is what we're targeting.
Okay, so it's still not completed, I guess, is the thing. This bill will do that. That's for sure. Now, with regards to the infrastructure and the other types of issues that we've been raised here, is it not true that during the parks, the management agreements, those things are actually worked out with the municipalities, the provinces, and so forth?
No, that's not correct, in fact.
Okay, so
the management, so the management planning process, first of all, it is not a binding process, management plans. Management plans are directional documents that we must, for every park and site in the country, have in place on a 10-year rotational basis, and those set out the direction, but they are non-binding. So there is nothing binding within that. And the other piece is, for all of those, we would actually need agreements. And one of the pieces on those agreements is those agreements, and in many cases, we will need the agreements, as parliamentarians, will need the agreements in place in order to be able to say you have free and clear title in order to, in fact, gazette those lands. And until that is done, I think that you have that issue before you as parliamentarians.
Right. No, and so the Parks Management Agreement, though, actually creates the structure for those discussions. And when you have, say, for example, the City of Windsor, the Province of Ontario.
No, that is not correct with management plans. They do not set that up.
So that might be, so we could amend that somehow through the bill and then work on that if that's the case. But I mean, we've been told differently, but I'll trust what you're saying here, obviously. But so if the municipalities, though, have agreement, the province have agreement, and similar to, say, for example, the Rouge, isn't that going to be a lot easier when there's agreement? Like, so say, for example, in these situations, we're having the City of Windsor saying that they want to actually have the federal government assume these lands, and the province is going that direction as well, too. Doesn't that make all that cooperation a lot easier?
Yes, and that's why we have the partnership table with those partners at the table in order to work through some of these issues. And as my colleague has stated, liabilities and these types of things tend to get worked out in the negotiation time ahead of the formal establishment, so that the management plan then becomes about how we're going to collectively operate and manage the park and the goals and the visions for it.
So what management plan, though? And let's be clear.
So
Yeah.
in the establishment of protected areas, we start normally with the feasibility process where everybody's invited to the table and given the opportunity to examine whether they're interested in it. If everybody agrees to that, we move to the planning and the negotiations part, and that's where we resolve. There could be licenses, there could be
Right.
title issues, we need to do surveys, etc. And we set the boundary in that stage. And once we have all agreed to that and we have all the proper agreements in place, the park's established and the management plan is done.
Great. Okay, so that's actually good news. Like, so the city of Windsor wants to do this, so it's just a matter of agreeing to those negotiations and those elements. So that's actually good news. So, okay, so this is actually, it's because I want to make sure that's not going to be a problem with the bill, and especially if we have, so the city of Windsor has to agree to, for example, transfer of property. All those things will then be discussed during that time process.
So it would be, that would be one of the things that you will need to look at, I think, as the committee, and as the committee brings the report forward, is that process, in fact, around timing of that. Because, and if I can just use for an example, if today there is any issue as around title on the lands that the city holds, we don't know. Nobody has done that title work as it goes forward. Then, in fact, you would have to amend what is in front of the committee today in order to take those title pieces into
Okay,
effect.
Thank you. We'll end on that point. That's a good point. We'll go to the second round now, starting with Mr. McLean for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses. Informative and nothing simple, it seems, when we're getting things done through the government. I do notice your brief, and the first question I'd like to ask briefly, Rouge National Park is the only one that's been set up under its own legislation so far. Is that the only national urban park in Canada?
It is the only national urban park in Canada administered by Parks Canada, yes.
And it is set up through legislation by
Separate
itself alone. So there's no legislation that already exists that says this is how national urban parks will be set up. Each of these is going to have a different legislation, a different footprint, if you will.
So so right now, it's just the Rouge, and that is why we're moving forward with a policy approach in order to determine what would be the way to do this. It's not normal to legislate each park individually. So at some point, if we want to consider legislation, again, not required to name a national urban park, but if we wanted to do legislation, we would want to be considering how that legislation relates to the other national urban parks we're setting up. And presumably, we would like to have, one bill potentially, and not a bill for each, or legislation for each unique park.
Yeah, and that's what I'm asking is, like, there's one legislation right now for one park, and you just can't mirror that with every other park that you're going to do here. So it should be a fairly simple overlay into a park such as the one proposed in this bill.
So I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, there's the principles of a national urban park here you're looking at setting up.
Yes.
Shouldn't this principle be the same?
So yes, you could set up a principled approach, if that's what you're saying, to setting up legislation which in fact could exist for many urban national parks across the country that would be based on some of the principles that were needed to be set up for the Rouge. The Rouge had some very specific elements to it that necessarily wouldn't go forward, and in that case it was about around ownership and federal ownership of the land.
And they're all going to have that, some
portion of it will have
right?
some ownership, yes. Correct.
So you mentioned something, and I read it in your notes here. Any provincial or city infrastructure in the park will immediately become subject to our regulations. Why is that a problem?
So for, and I'm going to try and use an example because it's probably the easiest way, but under our regulations, of course, ecological integrity is the number one priority of national parks. in the country. And so as we start to look at, for instance, municipal infrastructure that would go through the park or be abutting the park, that would be the overarching goal that, of course, we would have. But in that, for the lands that would actually be transferred, the regulations, so again, I'll use the sewer line, I'll use a hydro line, I'll use any type of utilities corridor that would go through that park. You have not excluded it in the current set of lands that you would transfer, and there is no provision in the National Parks Act to be able to do that. We added that into the Rouge National Urban Park Act so that if we sat down with the province and they said, for this highway interchange, we need to move the boundary back this much, it was possible to
I've
do
got
that.
only a little bit of time here, and I want
Yep.
just a couple more questions. Meewasin Park in Saskatchewan, is that under consideration as a national urban park?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And the other one I want to talk about here, you talked about clear title, surface and subsurface that you had to look at, including the liabilities associated there with. Clear title should be pretty easy to get, including in subsurface, don't you think? It's land that's existed for a long time. Title is clearly established who owns it and on record. So that's not really going to hold you up, is it?
For any of the lands, we require like surveys that are led by Natural Resource Canada, so they would do all that work. So it's ensuring that all that proper kind of due diligence is done before. So it's a timing issue.
But that due diligence is part of your job.
It is
part of anybody acquiring land. It's their job. So if this legislation moved you to doing that job, it would just be a step in the process.
The process that happens ahead of the legislation coming into effect, though. We would do all of that ahead of legislation coming into effect.
If the legislation, and the way I'm used to seeing it here, legislation from Parliament will direct the bureaucracy to take action. And what I'm hearing you saying is you'd rather have the department take action on their own without direction from a member, from a bill that's passed by Parliament. But we know there's steps between A and Z.
Right.
It's a question of, that there is a bill in front of Parliament that is moving towards having Parks Canada create a new park, and you're saying that
We're going to have to stop there.
process is stopping us there?
No.
Okay, but maybe you can elaborate on that in an answer to someone else, because it's an interesting point. Ms. Lambropoulos, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank Parks Canada for being our witnesses today to answer some of our questions. This is my first time on this committee, so my apologies for not necessarily knowing the full length of the bills that we're discussing. But I did read briefly on Bill C-248, and I listened to your testimony. So I guess my first question is, based on what you were saying, steps had already been undertaken prior to this legislation being introduced to the House to create a national urban park in Windsor. And so therefore, I guess I'm looking for a confirmation as to whether or not this legislation gets passed, will there be a park created in Windsor, in your opinion, as representatives from Parks Canada?
Yes. So again, I mean, we commend MP Massey on his work and his dedication to establishing a park. We do want to do that too. Our process will take a little bit longer than this bill, but will achieve the same result in the end. However, as noted, there are a lot of challenges with a bill that creates the park without having done some due diligence on.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Also, I come from a riding that is looking to have a national park created close by. And so considering that approach, I also was wondering what the potential consequences could be of this bill going forward. And I'm talking from a budget stance. I know that you've mentioned having the goal of creating several national urban parks across the country. If this bill were to move forward, would that be to the detriment of other parks that you have in your planning?
So thank you very much for the question. I think as we look, obviously as public servants, we do take our direction from the government, and the Speaker has ruled that this, in fact, does not create the necessity to have a royal recommendation, and therefore we wouldn't be in a good position to comment on that. But that being said, obviously what the feeling must be is within our existing budget that we would be able to reallocate funds to be able to do this, or that Parliament would appropriate new funds.
Okay, so technically, it wouldn't necessarily affect the creation of these other parks, is what I'm hearing.
Again, a difficult question to ask, to answer. Right now, we would need to find funding to do this and other parks if there is no appropriation, and the only way to do that would be to not do something else. So I don't want to say what that not do something else would be, but it would be to not do something else, or to have every one of our national parks across the country have a reduction in the amount of service and the amount of protection that we would provide.
Thank you. So it would affect other areas. I appreciate the response that you gave and the way that you were able to give it. My next question is, there has been, as other members mentioned, the Rouge National Park in Toronto was created, and it's a great example to look at as well. An act was created, and of course, that's why you're looking to have a broader scope and to create more without necessarily creating an act each time. But if this act were to go through, what are some changes that can be made specifically in looking towards that act, the Rouge National Park Act? Is there anything that we should be taking from there that was done properly that could be added to this bill?
I think a couple of things that would be good to look at would be, and certainly when we were doing the negotiations, and I will say, those were negotiations of land transfer that I was responsible for the Rouge National Urban Park. So one of the things that we did do at the end of that was, between the municipalities, the regional government, and the province of Ontario, was say that there would be a certain percentage of the park that could in fact be utilized in the future for urban infrastructure. So that, I think, is a positive. I think that there was positives around the fact that there was an established Indigenous circle for the leadership within that park. There was an established provincial, municipal, regional governing body. There was a advisory committee to the minister. I think those are all very positive elements of the Rouge National Urban Park, which should perhaps be considered as you move forward.
Thank you. Madame Posey, à votre tour.
Your turn, Madame Posey. Yes, thank you. The longer I listen, the more concerned I become. First of all, I understand that you are doing something that is very similar to what is in this bill. And the second thing is that your goal is to create federal and municipal parks elsewhere. Am I correct? Yes. Well, can I know where? I'm talking about Quebec. Because earlier my question sought to deal with this concern. Now is the federal government going to appropriate places, spaces, territories in Quebec to make federal municipal parks? That's what I'm worried about. The goal for a national urban park is, it's in our mandate as well, our terms of reference. We have to have conversations with the partners without becoming owners of the territories. So with our partners, we have to have these conversations. And we are now in the process of talking with partners in Caldwell, Saskatoon, and elsewhere in other parts of the country. So I'm going to give you a more specific question. If you speak with Montreal, and when you do that, the area is very near the Dorval Airport. It's in the very shadow of it. Are you going to look at that particular zone? We are looking at and speaking with the partners to see if there is one place or another that would be the best place, but there are certainly opportunities in Montreal. So several places in Montreal that would become national urban parks, and which would slip away from the municipality or from Quebec. Well, this is another conversation. We are looking at conversations with Quebec. This is really too early in the conversation, but we are certainly exploring opportunities. I'm finished, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Oh, I certainly have been very interested in your question, and I'm concerned too because I'm on the other side of the boundary. Inaudible. Mr. Massey, it's your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's what makes this project very special, is because we have the municipality that's requested Parks Canada take over that property, and that's one of the reasons why it has consensus. Same with the province of Ontario. I want to go to an issue I'm concerned about, though, is that you're suggesting that if the legislation goes through, then it would affect other parks. If we save the species here in Windsor, there were going to be compromises somewhere else, so the government wouldn't come up with resources or a plan. I mean, that doesn't sound like appropriate in terms of a response, because if this is held off even longer, I'll give a good example. Ojibwe Shores is the last national spot there under the Port Authority, and we haven't been able to, we stopped it from being bulldozed, has 200 endangered species. It has still, and you mentioned the memo of understanding, that's why I'm worried about this, is it still happens. And maybe you can kind of tell us what's happening with your department now, because they have shoreline erosion right now on that last piece of property that's on the Detroit River, international boundary. And we have shoreline erosion taking place daily on that. Are you doing anything about that right now, or do we have to wait till, I guess, and when will this draft become public in terms of what the real policy is? That's my concern, is as we wait around, we're going to lose more species at risk here.
So at this time, on that particular Ojibwe Shores, Parks Canada is not in administering that property at all. So
okay, so it's up. Yeah, so we have shoreline erosion taking place, and we're losing significant parts of it. In fact, the port got money to actually just scope the climate change along there. Now, with regards to the draft National Urban Parks policy that you're operating right now, do you have public meetings, and do you have minutes that you can provide to the public for all the meetings and people that you've had? Because we've had public meetings, and we've taped them, we put them on social media, we've engaged lots of communications, petitions, so forth. What can you provide to the committee here in terms of minutes and meetings with who you've had over the last number of months?
So the first public meetings associated with the draft policy were when the minister did the ministers' roundtable in 2020, and then we've been working with select partners and getting feedback and expert groups on the draft, and we'll be going to public consultation shortly. We do have to consult on all policy.
So under the National Parks Act right now, there is a duty to consult, and also to consult repeatedly, I think 2, 5, and 10 years, and report back to Parliament, all of us here. Is that not true?
For the management plans, we report to Parliament.
There is a 2-year requirement under the Act for the minister to hold a round table, and for the CEO to have every 2 years. Every 10 years, there is a management plan that is required for every place.
Great. And under your plan, how many? What's the comparable under your plan right now?
Under.
Well, your draft plan. What's the comparable? That's what's going to take place.
We're out of time. Unfortunately,
we don't know what your plan is.
We're out of time. I gave you more time than.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you've been generous.
Mr. Benson, for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to cede my time to Mr. Massey.
Great. Thank you. Thanks. So maybe we can kind of follow up on that. So comparing what we know is law and what we have here from the Library of Parliament and what we have from the Act, which we have in front of us as well too, how does your draft plan compare to that in terms of public consultation and accountability? And reporting back to Parliament?
So the development of the plan is underway. It'll follow the normal policy development process, which will include extensive public consultation. And so as I mentioned, we've had several meetings with kind of expert groups to inform the initial draft of the policy, and we'll be moving to full public consultation on that, of which there'll be a record of what was heard that's produced. In terms of the...
So there is none right now? Like if you can't...
there is under...
What can you release to us publicly about the draft plan's ability to consult with Parliament on a regular basis compared to the current process for national urban parks, or urban parks in general? That's I know what we got in law and what has to happen and what has to come back to us in this building. But what I'm looking for is under your contemplated plan, what is that comparable? And then if you can share any of that, because nobody knows that right now.
So this is a new program, and we're operating under a draft policy, but we envision, similar to all our programs, that there will be management plans that will be tabled in Parliament. As the National Urban Parks program will be under the agency, we'll be doing our normal reports to Parliament, our corporate priorities and our reports.
And so, I'm sorry, I'm pretty passionate about this because I'm worried about Ojibwe Shores right now and the entire continuity that's at risk, and taking longer time to do that and not even knowing whether it's going to be accountable is a worrisome thing to me. With regards to what's been taking place in Windsor and Essex County, can you table any minutes or information about who you've been meeting with, when, and how? Like, those are the things I think, I've been open in terms of having public meetings. We've done lots of, petitions. We've done lots of lines. We've had all kinds of different schools involved. We've had a whole series of things. That's why the city supports it. Caldwell Nations will come and thing. We've had discussions even informally with others, and so I'm kind of wondering what you can share with this committee about what you've been doing under your plan.
So we maintain a record of the consultations that we have. In fact, our work with the partnership committee, it will be Windsor that will be taking the lead on the public consultation, and we're supporting them to do so. And so there'll be a public record of all the public consultations that happen.
Okay, but you have a process that you're saying is in place right now. So I'm looking where can we have those minutes, and can we have those identified meetings that took place?
I would have to verify. Those are partnership meetings, and I'm not sure the rules of the table on those.
So I guess this is where, I had to go with what's in front of us in terms of the law using the National Parks Act. Now, I want to go to in terms of increasing boundaries later on. Now, are any of national parks, do they ever get expanded at any point in time, and how is that done?
Yeah, so we do expand parks from time to time, and normally a bill is tabled in Parliament to expand the boundaries.
Right. So this bill, again, would, if it's passed, and it would be if, say, for example, another spot was located later on, or we had a great, like I was a vice chair of the Conservation Authority, we had philanthropists that came and gave land to, the municipality or something else. It would just be amending those pieces of geography in the act. Is that not the process?
Correct. I would just note that the current study area that's being contemplated by the partnership group is larger, and so it would negate some of that after work if we were to use the larger boundaries currently being contemplated.
And if I could on that.
Of course.
Because I think that comes back to a little bit of what MP McLean was in fact asking about, was absolutely that could be done. Normally the process for that is that you look and you have a study area. You then look from a parliamentary perspective.
Yeah.
But do
okay,
all
sorry,
of
I have limited time.
all the title.
Yeah.
All of the work on that in order to make sure that it actually lives up to the requirement
absolutely.
of the
So I'm
act.
sorry to cut you off, but real quick, but that is a normal process to amend. Have almost all of Canada's national parks been amended to increase new lands? My understanding is that that's yes.
A
number of them have.
Yeah. And I understand what you're saying, but what we were starting with this bill was with the lands that wanted people to compelled to give towards. So we either have to find a solution to try to improve the bill to allow greater flexibility to include those lands earlier on, but if we can't at the moment, then we could always change the schedule later on. Is that not correct? Similar to what's been done for many parks across Canada.
Correct.
Okay, we're unfortunately out of time now. Mr. Weiler.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Parks Canada witnesses, for your testimony already. It's been very, very interesting learning about the whole details of this process, and we've talked a little bit about the process that's currently underway to create a national urban park in Windsor. I was hoping you could give us a timeline of when you were expecting that process to be completed and to have that be established as a national urban park.
Thanks. Yeah. So currently, as mentioned, we started this project over a year ago. We have a partnership committee with the City of Windsor, Caldwell First Nation, Walpole Island First Nation, and the Ontario government is at the table. And so we're in what we call a pre-feasibility stage, where everybody's tabling their interests and tabling the things that they may want to have studied further in the next phase. We expect to move into the planning phase and the negotiation phase this winter, and we're on track to establish the park by 2025 and sooner if partners are willing and able, and we're able to resolve all the issues and agree on co-management and these types of things.
Great, thank you for that. And you mentioned some concerns about the due diligence that's been gone through to this point with this bill that we're talking about, and particularly highlighted, and it's a number of the MPs around this table have had questions about the process for consulting and, if necessary, accommodating the First Nations in the area. What level of risk do you see for the government? Because, of course, the duty to consult and accommodate rests with the government, not individual MPs. If we move ahead with this bill before consulting one of the Indigenous groups that will be affected by this decision?
I think that's a difficult question for us to answer. I don't want to speak on behalf of any nation. So what we would say is our process is consulting both First Nations. And to our knowledge, Walpole Island has not been consulted in this bill. And so it will be dependent on their reaction to that, I guess. That's all I can say.
So is it the process for Parks Canada not to consult a nation that might be implicated with the development of a park in other contexts in Canada?
We consult with all First Nations, and I can tell you I'm involved in some that have 19 First Nations, and they may self-organize and decide how they want to be represented at the table. But that will be their choices, not ours. We don't assume one or the other. We invite everybody to the table, and they'll organize how they would like to organize. So at this point, we have both First Nations at the partnership table.
And can I just, one slight amendment to what Darlene said, Indigenous peoples. So not just First Nations, but obviously Métis and Inuit as well.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And were this bill to pass, do you have any recommendations for this committee about a timeline for implementation such that we would be able to include some of the due diligence that's been talked about today, as well as maybe time to engage First Nations that may be implicated as well, or Indigenous groups that may be implicated?
Yeah, I think there's, maybe three things to consider. So one is the timing, to just allow for a little bit more work, particularly on the boundaries. Our understanding is that the boundaries currently in the bill don't necessarily cover full parcels of land that maybe actually want to be included. So as I said, surveys need to be done in order to clarify that, and in order for us to take administration of the land. Certainly time for meaningful consultation, in particular to determine or to ensure that there is a reflection of Indigenous interests and co-management, which I think is currently not specifically referenced in the bill. And I think, again, just the boundaries, I guess, would be, again, the big one as well. So just some time to really look at the boundaries.
If I can on this, I think the one thing, and we haven't mentioned it yet, but the one thing that is excellent, and the partners that are already out there and doing the work today, I think should take a lot of pride in the fact that the work on the ecology in the area, correct, and what a jewel the ecology is in the area has been well documented, and that, in fact, from our process would speed things along. We haven't looked whether the ground has contamination from a contaminated site to know what the liability would be, for instance. So those are the types of due diligence. Coming back, again, to the point of we fully would, do that work under the direction of Parliament. We fully understand where our role falls in that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Weiler. This has been a very informative and enlightening discussion. This ends the first panel, the first hour of our meeting, and I'm going to thank you to the witnesses for your time and your explanations. And we're just going to pause now and bring the next panel online. Thank you very much. second panel. I see everyone has passed the sound test, and everyone is wearing the appropriate, up to standard equipment specified by the House of Commons. We have 4 witness groups. So we have 4 witnesses and witness groups. We have Chief Mary Duckworth from the Caldwell First Nation. We have Fred Francis, Councillor Ward 1, City of Windsor. And from the Friends of Ojibwe Prairie, we have the President, Bill Russell, and a board member, Mike Fisher. And from Wildlands League, we have Janet Sumner. Each witness or group of witnesses will have 3 minutes for opening statements, and then we'll go right into questions. So we'll start with Chief Duckworth, please, for 3 minutes.
Bonjour, Barado Kenyakuji Yajik Indishnika Makwadodam, Caldwell First Nation Donjaba. I'm very pleased to be here to present today. My name is Mary Duckworth. My spirit name is The Spirits Are All Around Me. I am the selected chief of Caldwell First Nation. I've come today to speak to you about the National Urban Park. I look forward to being able to speak today and discuss how important this park is to Southwestern Ontario. I feel that, as we all know, with climate change, that everything in the Southwest is on fire. It's a couple degrees warmer, and we know that we are losing erosion through our shorelines on Lake Erie. So I would like to explain that Caldwell First Nation is located in Leamington, where the band office is. However, our traditional territory extends from Windsor to Long Point. This was well documented. We are the descendants of the War of 1812 with Tecumseh, Pontiac, and the Crown. And so I am happy to sit here to speak about Caldwell First Nation and how important this park is. We know that we need legislative framework in order to make this national park happen. And I'm here to support the work that's been done, the hard work that's been done, and the hard work going forward. I would like to say that we have been consulted by Parks Canada. We were consulted on August 24th, 2022. And at that time, we were told that Parks Canada had consulted Walpole Island. So I said to Parks Canada, instead of splitting up the nations, let's bring the First Nations to the table and the partners, and let's consult in a manner that's meaningful and will reduce the time of traveling between 2 First Nations. To add to that, we have a good relationship with Point Pelee National Park. The superintendent met with Caldwell First Nation Chief and Council on October 6th to talk about co-management of that park. So I do know the co-management question is out there. The park has assured us that they are creating 6 national parks, and one of ours in Windsor is just one of the parks. So I'm here today, and I was reassured by the parks that this is going to happen, or I would not be here today speaking, because if it's not going to happen, then I'm wasting your time and my time. So I respectfully say that I look forward to being able to protect the over 200 species at risk, the protection of the last natural shoreline of the Detroit River, and I look forward to working with our partners. And I just want to make one thing clear to the committee that I understand the stakeholders have done a lot of work and care and have a lot, to be proud of. But I just want to make it clear that Caldwell First Nation, the First Nations, are the rights holders through Section 35 of the Charter of Rights in Canada. So
okay, thank you.
It's been defined. We know who we are. And I say thank you to the chair.
Thank you very much, Chief Duckworth. We'll go now to Councillor Francis from the City of Windsor for 3 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to appear before this committee today to help move forward with Bill C-248 and the cause of Ojibwe Park. My name is Fred Francis, and on Monday I was re-elected to Windsor City Council. I'm now entering my 3rd term on council, and Ojibwe Park falls within the boundaries of my ward. Many don't realize that when the City of Windsor first took ownership of this unique parcel of land, it was actually outside of our city limits. The nature preserve was acquired by the city of Windsor from the Canadian Salt Company in 1957 when this land was in the town of Ojibwe, and we've been maintaining stewardship of this property ever since. Today, while the municipal boundaries may have changed, our intention remains the same, preserving as much of this pristine, environmentally sensitive land as possible for the enjoyment of future generations. Residents in Windsor, Essex know that Ojibwe Park is a fantastic local feature. The trails at Ojibwe Park are an excellent family getaway, just minutes from our downtown core. Just as important, the unique microclimate of southwestern Ontario makes Ojibwe Park a unique butterfly sanctuary with species that can't be found anywhere else in Canada. Over the past few years, Windsor City Council has passed several resolutions in support of efforts to create a national urban park to link up the municipal, provincial, and federal lands in Windsor's West End to create a contiguous parcel as part of a new national urban park. Our council has unanimously endorsed that legislation that this committee is considering today. Simply put, Windsor deserves a national urban park managed and operated by Parks Canada, the same that exists in other parts of our great country. The example often cited is Rouge Park in East Toronto, but in southwestern Ontario, we know very well the benefits of Park Canada ownership through the fantastic local resource at Point Pelee National Park. The Parks Canada Agency was created to be a steward and operating entity for unique habitats across our nation and to create and run the programming associated with safe and ecologically sensitive recreation and tourism activities. The City of Windsor has been doing our best to maintain this environmentally sensitive plant and animal habitat for several decades, and we operate the Interpretive Center on site for student visits and teaching experiences. Earlier this fall, the City of Windsor hosted our formal Truth and Reconciliation Day events on September 30th at Ojibwe Park. Many Windsor residents will tell you Ojibwe Park is a special place, but we know it could be so much more. Only through Parks Canada's ownership and operation can these separate federal, provincial, and municipal lands be assembled and maintained to their fullest potential. Many in Windsor are concerned that the ongoing consultation activity is moving too slowly and meant to distract from the core objective of Parks Canada land ownership. Taxpayers in Windsor are concerned that without Parks Canada taking formal ownership and stewardship of these lands, that any national urban park designation will be just another example of downloading onto our municipality. Simply put, either the federal government creates a national park at Ojibwe or it doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
Let's not try to...
Yeah, we'll have to stop there, but I'll take the opportunity to congratulate you on your re-election earlier this week.
Thank you very much.
For the Friends of Ojibwe Prairie, I imagine it's Mr. Roussel who will speak for 3 minutes, or will you be splitting your time with Mr. Fisher?
Splitting our time.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Bill Roselle, and I'm the president of the Friends of Ojibwe Prairie. I'm here today with my colleague Mike Fisher from our board of directors. The Friends of Ojibwe Prairie is a volunteer registered charitable organization dedicated to promoting public awareness of the Ojibwe Prairie complex and its unique biological, cultural, and historical importance. We would like to thank the committee for providing us with the opportunity to talk to you about why the Ojibwe Prairie complex is so important to our community and why it is imperative to ensure that the complex and surrounding natural areas are protected to the highest degree as a national urban park. We also recognize its particular importance to the Indigenous communities with the First Nations, the Ojibwe Prairie complex sitting on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which includes Ojibwa, Odawa, and Potawatomi. The Ojibwe Prairie complex and surrounding lands are a special place, well worthy of the highest level of protection. The key features of the Ojibwe Prairie complex are its tallgrass prairie and oak savanna ecosystems. The tallgrass prairie and oak savanna ecosystems are some of the most endangered ecosystems in Canada. Despite this, the Ojibwe Prairie complex is the most concentrated site for rare species in Ontario.
Joint written brief has been submitted on behalf of the Friends of Ojibwe Prairie, Essex County Field Naturalist Club, Wildlife Preservation Canada, and the Citizens Environment Alliance. The submission also has the support of the Public Advisory Council, Detroit River Canadian Cleanup locally, as well as Ontario Nature Provincially. The purpose of our submission was to provide 4 key areas of comment that we feel are essential to the creation of an Ojibwe National Urban Park. These 4 key areas are legislation that makes ecological integrity the top priority, maximizing park boundaries for increased ecological preservation and habitat, meaningful consultation and partnerships with Indigenous communities, and robust community consultation. While we won't be able to fully cover all of these areas in these introductory statements, we welcome you to review our written brief for any questions you may have. We'd like to touch on the importance of strong legislation that prioritizes ecological integrity to establish an Ojibwe National Urban Park. In reviewing the legislation, discussion of Bill C-40 and Bill C-18 relating to Rouge National Urban Park, we noted significant debate over the high standards set by the Canada National Parks Act of maintaining ecological integrity as the first priority for all aspects of park management. This led to amendments being required and delay of the transfer provincial lands to the federal government. While urban settings can prevent unique challenges, we would suggest it is precisely why it is crucial to have strong legislation that makes first priority of ecological integrity clear. Our community is eager to have such legislation, as evidenced by the City of Windsor expressing their full support that an Ojibwe National Urban Park be created by the Canada National Parks Act. We thank the committee for the opportunity to appear and will gladly take any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. And last but not least, Ms. Sumner from Wildlands League.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to speak. My name is Janet Sumner. I'm Executive Director for Wildlands League. Wildlands is a not-for-profit charity that has been working in the public interest to protect public lands and resources since 1968. At Wildlands, we have extensive knowledge of land use in Ontario and across Canada. We have a long history of working with governments, provincial, federal, Indigenous, and municipal, and scientists, the public and resource industries on progressive conservation. We've published on a variety of issues, including just recently the Hill Times article on the role of nature networks in urban areas and how they can play a key role in a federal plan to preserve biodiversity. You may have also seen the results of our work in helping amend the Rouge National Urban Park Act to include ecological integrity as the management priority by law, thereby meeting the IUCN standard as a protected area. We celebrated this achievement with a community paddle of the Rouge, where we had 200 paddlers out for a Sunday paddle with the Prime Minister. Wildlands thanks the Standing Committee on the Environment and Sustainable Development for your attention to Bill C-248. Wildlands is a strong supporter of the need to create Ojibwe National Urban Park, and I'll explain why. For the past few weeks in Ontario, we've been witness to the most glorious displays of autumn splendor in recent memory. It's times like these where the beauty of nature is inescapable, even in the midst of our cities. We are fortunate that our work at Wildlands League routinely asks us to go out into nature and to shake off the city and get inspired. We also get to see firsthand the threats and what is happening to nature. I was raised in London, Ontario. As a family, we spent time on the shores of Lake Erie, and as a teenager, I visited Windsor, Chatham, Sarnia, Dorchester, St. Mary's, Tillsonburg, and back again every baseball season, hockey, and soccer year. I know the back roads and the beauty of Southern Ontario. Today, there are two main existential threats: the increasing climate chaos and the grave loss of biodiversity. In Southern Ontario, there is both an incredible species diversity and Canada's fastest growing and largest urban population. Yet barely 3% of the landscape is safeguarded by permanent legislated protection. It's no surprise that the majority of Canada's at-risk species are clinging on to existence. I'm actually going to jump ahead in my remarks so that I get this last point in. What we hope is to see a nature network in Windsor, but we need to create it in the right way, and we need to make sure that the legislation includes and prioritizes ecological integrity. Right now, moving forward with policy, we don't have that guarantee. And further, what we risk is that the transfer of provincial lands, which are actually governed by Ontario's Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act, does include ecological integrity as the management priority. And if those lands are transferred, there is a risk that will actually downgrade protection in law. And so that's why we fully support, as does the City of Windsor and Chief Caldwell and the Caldwell First Nation, Bill C-248, and we would like to see in law protection of ecological integrity. We also support the opportunity for co-management of the Ojibwe National Urban Park and defer to the First Nations and how they may want to move this forward.
Thank you.
And finally, sorry, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. There'll be time to explore these issues through questions. Mr. Courik for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses for for joining us here today. And it's interesting. I've found over the course of debate this being a private member's bill, and it seems like there is significant support for the creation of this park. It was certainly interesting and remains interesting. The all but two members of the government voted against the private members bill, but the unique dynamic of a minority parliament saw that it passed, and it is now before this committee, and it certainly provides some interesting opportunity, I think, for collaboration. And certainly, with great interest, I listened to, and I hope that the witnesses had a chance to listen to the Parks Canada representatives before. But I guess my question is to Chief Duckworth and Councillor Francis. There seems to be the hang up on the process, and the government and Parks Canada said the process through the process of a private member's bill is problematic. Yet we've heard significant support for C-48 moving forward. So I'd like to open it up to both of you to provide some comments about particularly the process question, because we understand the support, but the process question and why you support or do not support C-48 as the mechanism to create this park. We'll start with Chief Duckworth.
Oh, miigwech. The mechanism is a legislative framework, and that's the mechanism that's been done to create the Rouge. In being able to create new legislative framework, we can create a really strong document to work from to ensure that the First Nations are being consulted, that we all have a voice, and that we're able to protect the land. I work in First Nations government, and I don't understand what the holdup is. I know for me and the Caldwell citizens that this is important, as I'm sure it is for Walpole. Walpole may not be here because they just had an election and they are just getting orientated. So I'll speak to that, but I'm not sure. Maybe Mr. Francis could answer that better.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you for the
Mr.
question.
Francis.
Thank you for the question. We support the legislation in Bill 248 because it's a tried and true process. When we're talking about policy negotiation, we don't know what that entails. But with legislation, there are firm parameters what that entails, to the point where the City of Windsor has offered its parcel to Parks Canada at no cost. Not only that, but having a park run and established by Park Canada sooner rather than later, we know how significant that is with Point Pelee. We've seen it. And that allows us to protect this significant portion of land throughout our city for forever. And, future generations of Windsorites and quite frankly, everyone in Essex County would be forever grateful to the federal government if we were able to move faster. And that's why we support this legislation that we're considering today, because we know what that entails. It's concrete, and it allows us to move forward sooner rather than later.
I appreciate that, and it's interesting because often the conversation goes around the requirement for government to do something when it's actually Parliament that government is a function of Parliament, and I think that's where in a minority Parliament there's certainly some of these unique opportunities to forward these conversations. Both Chief and Councillor, are you confident that some of the concerns that have been raised surrounding the challenges in consultations and some of the technicalities around boundaries and whatnot, are you confident that if Bill C-248 was to pass, that some of those challenges that have been highlighted, are you confident that they could be overcome from what your experience with both Parks Canada and different levels of government? Are you confident that those things could be overcome? Chief first.
I'd like to say that absolutely they can be overcome. The issues that were brought up by Andrew Campbell, the one issue I think will be an issue, and that was when they were saying consulting Indigenous people. Again, I referred to the rights holders, and the rights holders are the Three Fires Confederacy, which are the nations, the 5 nations within southwestern Ontario, who now have a deal with hydro. We are co-owners and the lines that are being run through our territory, all 5 nations. And I did hear Mr. Campbell say the Métis. The Métis are Indigenous, but they are not rights holders, and they are not from Southwestern Ontario. So as you'll see that the federal government and the provincial government is very cautious in who they consult with.
I really hate to do this, but Councillor, if you just have a quick comment. I'm almost out of time. Just wanted to make sure that you both get a chance to comment on this.
Yes, I'm confident in that we're able to move forward. Yes.
Chief, if you have a few more seconds, if there's anything you wanted to add, I'll go back to you.
No, I just I just feel that all the support is here. The support has been there. I just feel we wouldn't be here today if we did not table this bill. And I made it clear with Parks Canada, if they could please move through the process in a meaningful way so we don't finish this park in 5 years.
Thank you.
I think I'll end on that comment.
Thank you, Mr. Longfield, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for helping us with this study that we're doing. And when I voted in the House for this to come to committee, it's exactly for this reason, so that we can dive into what's been happening in terms of consultations. And Chief Duckworth, in particular, I was interested in the relationship that you've had so far, and also the relationship with Walpole. This summer, I was up in the Chippewas of the Nawash Nation and also the Saugeen Ojibwa Nation, and the relationship between those two groups and those two nations. I wonder about any kinds of parallels of the relationship that you've had with Walpole, and whether what was said in the previous testimony about having an agreement, now you're mentioning 5 nations possibly could be involved with the discussion around this park. Is there some type of an agreement with you and Walpole?
I think, to be clear, is we always say as First Nations people, you let us worry about our relationships, and you worry about yours. But that being said, and I think that was important to say to the park when they were consulting the two of us. So to kind of put it to you in a way with the 5 nations, we understand our territory, and we understand we work within that territory. There are 5 nations within that territory. 2 need to be consulted. You have the Pinery, they are consulted by Kettle Point. There are other parks. So now I forget the question, but
you're
no
answering
worries.
the question by showing
Yes.
the complexity, and that's what I really wanted to see on the record. I feel like we haven't heard from Walpole, and that's a concern I have.
Well, I think that you have to look at it. You can't force people to the table. I do know that Walpole Island, I have a close relationship with Walpole Island. I worked on their territory for 17 years.
Okay.
I know the people, I know the chief, and there's no way we would hurt our sister nation. We don't do that to each other.
Right.
There's never any fights in the paper. I don't know if you noticed. We always take care of business collectively within the Three Fires Confederacy.
Great, super, and we're learning as settlers, and it's great to hear that. It's very similar to what I found in Chippewa, is that people worked on each other's areas, and family relations are even tighter. And I know that Parks Canada is consulting with Walpole, but making sure that we do make sure that if people can be at the table, that they're invited to the table. To go over to Councillor Francis, and congratulations as well on election to office, and thank you for your service. I know and I'm not saying that lightly, but I do have limited time. I know that in the initial stages, when we did the Rouge as a first run of a national urban park, to learn how do we work within the levels of government as well as the citizens that we're all serving, but each of us has our jurisdictional responsibilities. My understanding is that the goal is to create 15 new urban national parks, that 20 submissions came forward to Parks Canada for consideration. Edmonton, Saskatoon, and Windsor have now actively engaged. I know Montreal is looking and Victoria is also looking at becoming engaged in the process. Because we're trying to get a framework for national urban parks in Canada, we're still fairly early, but some of the complexities about having subsurface liabilities, like who's responsible if the sewer breaks, and does that fall under City Council? Does that fall under Parks Canada? How do we know the difference between the two? Have you been involved personally with the consultations? I know, or with the competition, first of all, to get from 20 down to a smaller number?
The competition itself, no, that would be up, I would assume, to city administration and
Sure.
their committee with Parks Canada.
Okay.
But as I stated before, Council, Windsor City Council has passed a unanimous support for, for this legislation, and you'd have a willing partner in the city of Windsor. I don't foresee that to be an issue at all.
Right. I mean, and part of what I answer my question is because Guelph is also there's a group in Guelph that wants to come forward and be considered as a candidate for one of the future parks. But the city of Guelph City Council hasn't discussed it yet. We haven't gone any further than there's a group that says, here's a part of Guelph that could be a national park. And what do we do to get the interest of the federal government? So I get phone calls on that. When I think unanimously we would all love to see a national park in our areas, but there is a process, and now we've got two processes. So are you working with the C48 process, 248 process, or are you working with Parks Canada process, or are you doing both at the same time?
20 seconds, please. Yeah.
Both at the same time.
Okay, that's pretty clear.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Madame Posey.
Madame Posey? Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses who are here today. If I've understood correctly, you're all in favor of C248, but there's also consultation and work that is being done by Parks Canada. So as has just been said, you are working with both. My question is simple. There's a process. C248 provides a process which might be more rapid. So is it necessary to go towards a national approach? Or would it not be more rapid to have a municipal or provincial approach? Who is the question for? Anyone?
Well, I'll just jump in then and answer very quickly. I respect the question, and you're right. But from our perspective, from the City of Windsor perspective, the more rapid approach is more favorable. And it's more set, it's more concrete, and it allows us to move forward quickly and know what we get into. So for us anyway, that would be more favorable, the more rapid approach. And that's why we're here to speak positively about Bill C248.
And if I've understood, moving towards C248, that will provide a more rapid route than through municipal councils? The gentleman nodded yes, from what I've seen. Any other questions? Well, I'll leave the rest of my time to my colleague, Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Thanks to my colleagues who have been so generous. This has been a long journey, and I really do appreciate that and the questions being asked. My first question is to Chief Duckworth. Caldwell First Nation is an interesting story. You did your part for our country, and had to go through a long period of time to establish your current footprint that you have right now. And I remember when we crashed the Gordie Howe Bridge community benefits, where you were left out of that process. Would doing this properly be part of reconciliation for even that most recent mistake where next to this project we have Canada's #1 infrastructure project and you were left out of community benefits despite being basically the Section 35 landowners?
Yes, that's a great question, Brian. So truth and reconciliation, we talk about that. And the truth is, what is it? We're trying to create a national park through a bill, through legislative framework, so that it is solid and it will be there. The reconciliation part comes with action. There can be no truth and reconciliation without actions from the governments that sit over top of the nations. And so we like to see ourselves as an equal to you. However, we're not treated as an equal, as you know. We've come a long way, Caldwell First Nation. We were guaranteed Point Pelee and the lands around it was our traditional territory after the War of 1812. However, the settlers pushed us off, and then we needed to go into a specific land claim process, which, was granted. We won, and there's long documentation to speak of our history. And so being able to have truth and reconciliation means exactly what we're doing. Look at us all working together at different levels of government, non-government, special interest, people who care about the environment. We're all at the table. We're all waiting. And I just feel like we're waiting for Parks Canada to say, all right, we're going to do it, or we're not going to do it. I'm a little confused because I understood it was going to be done. They were mandated to do it, and there were 6 parks. So that's the issue I have. And also, we know Canada, has aligned itself with the rights of Indigenous people. And, where's Canada at with that? I think that now that Canada has adopted that, that's a piece that we need to look at when we're developing these parks and respecting, what's happening. Miigwech.
Thank you, and thank you for your leadership on this. To Councillor Francis, I'm not sure everybody understands the significance of the Gordie Howe Bridge that's going up. In our areas that we represent, we have 40,000 vehicles per day that go through, 10,000 trucks. This new border crossing is actually going to assume much of that traffic. And the concerns I have about kind of an unregulated draft policy that we have with the government's plan right now, I'm not saying it's wrong for other spots, but for this spot, and it might even end up with legislation, as how long it takes. The Gordie's going to come on in a couple of years. That's going to be tens of thousands of vehicles right next to this place and run along the entire ecosystem alongside of that. What are your concerns about how long this takes and the support's necessary to support this fragile ecosystem? Because it's going to get an inundation of traffic that's new right next to it. And I'm really worried. We've seen how the memo of understanding for the port land for Ojibwe Shores has taken forever for a lot of reasons. Do you share any of those concerns?
I do, and that's a great point. As you all know, Windsor hosts the busiest border crossing in all of North America, and with the Gordie Howe International Bridge set to come online, that traffic is going to increase, and that intensity is going to increase. So in order for us to move rapidly, and why the city supports Bill C-248, it allows us to move quickly because we really have an opportunity. Time is not on our side when we're talking about vehicular traffic increasing. So we have an opportunity to move fast now and really safeguard this gem and increase this gem and grow this gem now and grow it for decades to come because we know that the border traffic is not going to decrease. It's only going to increase. So the opportunity is now, in our opinion.
Your organization does a lot of work with ecotourism, and the Gordie Howe Bridge is going to have a free bike and pedestrian access lane. We're going to connect into this entire ecosystem. Slow Roll Detroit, for example, has 4,000 people to go out on Monday just to bicycle and so forth. And we've actually extended the Great Canadian Trail into the United States there. Do you have any concerns about what the stress could be on the ecosystem if we do have not the proper supports to do ecotourism correctly?
Absolutely. Obviously, protecting the environment is a concern for all of us. And hosting that busiest border crossing in all of North America, that does provide, stress onto our ecosystem. So anything we can do to safeguard against that and put the resources in place to battle that is something we're interested in. And quite frankly, the City of Windsor cannot do that alone. That's yet another reason why we're calling on Parks Canada to essentially take stewardship and maintenance over Ojibwe Park. If we're looking for the City of Windsor to do that, we just don't have the resources to do that alone.
Sumner, can you respond to this as well, too?
I'm sorry, MP Massey, what was that question again?
Just the stress on the ecosystem that might take place with regards to increased traffic and as well ecotourism that might take place down there. Like Point Pelee's been under stress from that as well, too. So my concern is the length of time it'll take to get a full operation and plan and put it off.
Yes, I think Bill 248 allows us to move forward quickly, but also you've got the consultation that happens around a park management plan, and that's an ongoing process. And then in Rouge National Urban Park, and situation here where it will be an ongoing process to manage that park management plan. It also allows Parks Canada to engage in the broader ecosystem and be speaking to some of these issues that would be happening because of the increase in traffic.
To back to Ms. Sumner, increasing spaces for the parks like the Rouge, can you give a quick analysis of the Rouge and Windsor, why Windsor is a little bit different, and again, how to increase spaces in parks?
Well, Rouge National Urban Park has been growing ever since its creation, and I'm the chair of the Rouge National Urban Park Advisory Committee, so that's how I know that it's an ongoing process. And it actually, I think it shares more similarities than differences because it too is made up of unconnected or separate parcels of land. And when they brought those together, you can manage them as one park ecosystem and start to think of it that way and grow the greater ecological integrity. And that's what I'm hoping for with Windsor, that a similar approach is taken, but it still enshrines ecological integrity as part of its management plan and in its legislative authority.
And has that been really helpful when it comes to roads and other infrastructure that's there? I know that the Rouge has a lot of complex usage. Having been there myself, is that the way to go? Is having that type of a system in place?
Yes, I think it's a matter of the conversation. So some of it is excised from the park. For example, the Highway 401 is not actually inside the park, but just adjacent to it. It's been excised from it. And that's part of the conversation that you have in the park management plan and creation of that. While other pieces have actually, like agriculture, for example, is part of Rouge National Urban Park, and where you can do things in a way that are actually moving you in a more positive direction on ecological integrity. It allows you to do all kinds of stewardship programs, like with farmers who own land there.
Concerns over the ecosystem right now and the stresses of climate change, and also too is that I mentioned the intensification that's going to take place with the new transportation corridor that's coming in line, and climate change and other factors.
Yeah, we call this Canada's ecological hotspot because it is where biodiversity loss is at its peak. It's also where climate change is being felt. You've got the microclimates there, and the city of Windsor is routinely suffering from flooding and heat events. And so actually preserving these areas is actually what's going to be your buffer against climate change. And what we've seen in the past with Rouge is we've actually seen that once you start to move forward with a national urban park, people start to find parcels of land in their couch cushions. They can start putting things forward that say, well, what about adding this? What about adding that? And it actually improves and makes the ecological integrity greater. And so far, the experience of Windsor seems to be proving that point. We're finding people who are, or cities or adjacent towns that are saying, well, hang on a second, I've got a parcel of land that I think would work well here. And so my expectation is that the park it won't be just one expansion, but there'll be many expansions. That's what I'm hoping for.
Do Friends of Ojibwe have any opinion on that?
There's 15 seconds.
Mr. Rosell?
You're on mute, but please briefly.
My apology. Yeah, certainly we're under a lot of pressures down here. There's a lot of opportunity to increase what we've got down here. Lots of areas to make this bigger, and just to help ensure the survival of this very rare ecosystem.
Okay, we'll go to the second round. I'm going to try and keep it to 4-4-2-2-4-4. So instead of 5 minutes, so it's only a 20% decrease, but I'll be flexible if you're onto something really interesting. Mr. Benson.
Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. It's been an interesting discussion. It looks like everybody wants this to happen. It's just a matter of getting the right process in place. Listening to Parks Canada today, they said that they would have a park in place by the end of 2025, and in their notes they say it would be a bigger park. And we can get Bill C-248 passed sooner, but it'll be a smaller park. I'm just curious on how all of you feel about what the trade-off is there and having a slightly a longer time frame, but a bigger park in the long run for the ecology and preserving the ecology, or having a park sooner but a smaller park. What's your thoughts on that? And that's to all the witnesses.
I think I'll say, I guess, on behalf of the Friends of Ojibwe Prairie, it's an excellent question. I think it's something that we all weigh, because we're looking at two processes and trying to find synergies between the two to make this happen the way we all want. And certainly acknowledging the work Parks Canada is doing with the City of Windsor to identify those lands, and the work that is being done through Bill C-248 to make it happen quickly. We're hopeful. Hopefully, we're hopeful through the amendment process there may be ways to find ways to create some sort of collaboration there. So it's not two independent processes working on these things, but process that might be some collaboration so that we can make this happen quickly, as well as maximizing the footprint for the park.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah, just why the City of Windsor supports Bill C-48, because we understand what that entails, and we believe it's more concrete. Our fear and our concern is that the City of Windsor will receive a national urban park in name only, and nothing much will change. You'll still have federal, municipal, and provincial ownership of the separate pieces of land. So with legislation, we know we don't get that. We know it will be taken on by the stewardships of Parks Canada, and that's why we're advocating for Bill C-248. Our fear is that we get a national park, and that we get it in the form of a media release, and a media release only.
Okay. Chief Duckworth, Caldwell Nation has expressed support and it's reported that you're going to be co-managing this park. And I think I'm not sure if that's exactly true. First, you can confirm that. But I think is this going to be a first in Canada where First Nations will be co-managing a park with Parks Canada? And can you give us some background in terms of, how much of an influence you will have, what's the structure will be and your role will be in terms of that management or co-management of the park?
Yes, I can speak to that. So we're early in discussions, and we had spoken to Parks Canada about a co-management model, which has been done before. And I'll leave that to Janet to be able to give you that background. So what does co-management look like? Well, co-management has a First Nations lens, which would be, if Walpole was interested, great, we would co-manage together. So what does it mean? It means walking lockstep with the park to ensure that we are taking care of everything that we committed to take care of. What does that mean? The people, the water, the plants, the animals, all of that in a comprehensive plan and manner, so that we know exactly what our duties are and what our responsibilities are to each other.
Okay.
So co-management, to me, means partnerships, working together.
Perfect.
And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. It sounds like everyone is in favor of establishing this Ojibwe National Park, and it sounds like it will be absolutely amazing. I think the major question is, how do we establish it, and whether to proceed with Bill C-248 and then do due diligence and work out management plans, et cetera, or to wait and have that due diligence and some of the other work done first, and then establish it. And one of the things about the Bill C-248 that concerns me is that it's adding this under the Canada National Parks Act. And in that act, there are no urban parks currently. The Rouge National Urban Park has a separate act, the Rouge National Urban Park Act. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on the flexibility or ability to make changes and to deal with some of these issues. So there's really two things I'd like you to comment. One is why, since the park is going to be established by Parks Canada either way, why would we not work out the co-management plan like there was one with the Rouge National Urban Park and look at some of these due diligence issues prior to it's almost like putting the cart before the horse. So why would we want to do it this way as opposed to the other way when there's clearly been a commitment to establish 6 new urban parks? And we have the example of the Rouge National Urban Park that was established. So perhaps you can comment on that. Mr. Francis, I know the City of Windsor has been working with Parks Canada already on the process that was set in place by Parks Canada. And so why is that not a good process, and why are you wanting to go through this Bill C-248 instead of follow through on the process that you're working on currently?
Oh, thank you for that. Because we don't know what the process is, and we don't know what the process entails. We can say put the cart before the horse, but our fear is we're gonna get a cart and no horse, or a horse and no cart. So, like I said, our fear from the City of Windsor's perspective is that via media release, it's going to be declared a national urban park, and nothing really changes.
So can I just do a quick follow-up on that? Why do you fear that, given the example of the Rouge National Urban Park that was established and where legislation was set and where all of the things that were pledged to happen happened?
Because everything's opened up to a policy that's based on negotiation, and there's no
it was
concrete...
in that case too.
But there's also legislation involved. If we allow legislation involved, it eliminates all that ambiguity. It eliminates all that potential negotiation and not knowing what the process is and what it would look like moving forward. A few months ago,
couldn't you look back to the process that we used for the Rouge National Urban Park? I mean, there is a process that has taken place, and I think Parks Canada's
also included legislation. Right. So moving forward with Bill C-248, it removes all that ambiguity and it moves us forward to where we all want to go without any ambiguity. And everyone knows what's going on and how it's going to play out and what it will look like for decades to come.
But this bill just outlines the parameters of the boundaries of the park, and it becomes part of the Canada National Parks Act. So how does that address your concerns about the process?
Right. Because once it moves under Parks Canada, everyone knows that emblem, right? Everyone knows that logo, and we know what that entails moving forward. We know it locally with Point Pelee, right? Our fear is, again, having essentially status quo, but it's just called the National Urban Park. Moving it under Parks Canada quickly, rapidly under legislation removes all those concerns and allows us to move forward relatively quickly.
So Parks Canada spoke earlier.
We've got 15 seconds.
Okay, so Parks Canada spoke earlier in this hearing today, or this testimony today. So you'd be working with the same people in Parks Canada on the same process, but you're basically saying you don't trust that it would happen unless this legislation was in place. Is that what I'm hearing?
I don't know what that process entails. I don't know what the end outcome could be. With legislation, I do.
Okay, we'll have to go to Mme. Posey. With pleasure, of course.
Yes. Thank you. In view of the fact that the connection was poor earlier, but it's come back now, I listened to Madame Duckworth speak. I'll ask the same question. Would it be easier, the choice of moving towards the federal government, would that make matters easier with Madame Duckworth or her partners? Wouldn't it be just quicker to move towards the municipal or provincial levels rather than the federal level?
Thank you for that question. So, as you know, First Nations are federally governed. We fall under the federal government. We do not fall under the provincial government, and we do not fall under a municipality. And so federally, that's where we work. We have a great relationship with Point Pelee. We do a lot of work with Point Pelee. So does Walpole, our sister nation. We meet together. I feel that we need this bill. I feel that if we don't get the framework and get the bill legislatively done, then it just sits there. Then it's nothing. And I've heard you say, wouldn't it be great to let longer time go by for consultation? Then you leave it up to the park, and you leave it up to their schedule and how busy are they, and what is their, are they motivated, knowing that this park could eat up some funds, is what I've heard. So I hope the federal government can allow these parks to happen, and they will be funded in a manner that that they need to be. And this isn't the first co-managed park And I wish I had all the time in the world to talk to you about it with my friend, Ms. Sumner, but I don't. But she is
Okay.
a great ally if you ever need information.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Massey. Mr. Ma.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, I want to bring in Ms. Sumner actually on this. So these have been excellent questions, and I like her opinion because of her experience with both the Rouge and setting up other parks in her work that's going on now.
Right. So Rouge National Urban Park was established by legislation which guaranteed ecological integrity. It starts from that point, then you do your management plan. So actually, that's what Windsor's asking for. They're asking for legislation that guarantees ecological integrity. So while it is an amendment to the geography, it would be added to the National Parks Act, which guarantees ecological integrity. So that's the starting point. And then you do your management plan. So the two processes are not the same. Right now, what Parks Canada is promising is policy. There's no guarantee, as the MP from Windsor or the city councillor from Windsor references, that we don't know what comes out of that process. So right now, what we do know is if you get an amendment to the National Parks Act, you get ecological integrity, then your management plan is written with that as its governing principle, just like Rouge was. So they actually want a similar process to Rouge. They're just not asking to create a separate body of legislation. And I can tell you all the reasons why that had to be done, because it was a very complex landscape where there wasn't this kind of unanimity of agreement. There was actually great division. So separate legislation was the only way to actually create that unanimity.
And I guess that's what really makes this opportunity really unique, is because we have so many partners like the City of Windsor, Caldwell First Nations, yourselves, Friends of Ojibwe, the amazing work they've done, and many others. There's, Unifor Environment Committee. I could go on and on. That we have that kind of consensus, and so the Rouge is very special. But the drafters of the bill, and when you looked at it, they told us this was the best way to go for everything.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. McLean for 4 minutes.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for all the witnesses. I'm going to cede my time here because I think Mr. Massey knows more about this than all of us, and I'm going to let him have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, and I really appreciate this opportunity, because especially I'm going to go back to Chief Duckworth. With regards to the other projects that you're doing with Caldwell Nations, can you highlight them and maybe why this fits into the other projects that you're doing? Because it's not been long that you've been rebranding in terms of like getting back into the area. I've represented there for about 20 years, and it's been exciting. This is an exciting chapter of having you emerge. Can you highlight some of the other things and how this fits into those other things that are taking place?
Yeah, I'd love to. So we have a very strong relationship with Point Peely and the superintendent and all the staff. We participate. We're the only First Nation that participates with them in a deer herd reduction, also known as a cull, where Caldwell First Nation hunters go in and remove the deer, the overpopulation of deer, in order to keep it safe, to keep the park safe. That meat is harvested by us and given out to our First Nation members, where we represent 400 citizens. There is a reemergence, as you said, because we've got the land base now. Before we were kind of scattered. I think it's important to note that the park has done a lot of work with us in renaming some of the streets from settler names to our First Nations names. The park has done murals with Walpole Island and ourselves with regards to the art. As with the Gordie Howe Bridge, those two big pieces of art on the Gordie Howe Bridge, one is from a Caldwell citizen and one is from a Walpole citizen. We know our boundaries and we respectfully work with each other. So Walpole sits with us at the table at Parks Canada when we talk about the development of their 10-year plan, which we just went through. Why I think it's important to have the bill go through and with the parks is because we already have established relationship with Point Peely, Walpole, and Caldwell. And I think that it fits under their mandate. I believe it's important. I know that we're talking about adding pieces, but at this time, I would just love to be able to have that legislation go through to protect that piece of land and to create something wonderful in southwestern Ontario, knowing what we're going through with climate change. We're doing the same in Point Pelee. We're looking at bringing back the wild rice was one of our discussions. We've talked about how we're going to manage that and how we are going to have, other people come into the park, like the schools. We're really big on working with the schools and the teachers to educate them on Point Pelee, the history, its biodiversity, its partnerships. We have a partnership now with Hydro. We just signed with them. So we're working there. We're also working with the city of Windsor to ensure, and Doug Ford, to ensure that we're allowing big projects to come through the Three Fires Confederacy territory, as we have a special table set with Doug Ford and 7 ministers. As you know, that we have a lot of hydro, battery storage. Windsor's going to be doing, battery vehicles. A lot of energy is going to have to come through our territory. And if we can't save that one little piece, knowing everything that we're about to do to shift from climate change, then it's shame on us for not being able to do that. Miigwech.
Real quickly to the Friends of Ojibwe, just are the volunteers prepared like yourself to help move this quickly to Friends of Ojibwe? The hours you put in.
Absolutely. I think that's, we're certainly put all the effort we can into it.
Good. Okay, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. And it's probably going to be the end of the session. So I'd really like to allow the 4 groups to answer this question, understanding that time is limited at the end. If we could probably keep each of your answers to just under a minute. And the question is, for each of your groups, what is your vision for this national urban park, and how would this bill support the vision? And if I could start with you, Chief Duckworth, and then Mr. Francis, Friends of Ojibwe Prairie, and then Ms. Summers. Thank you.
Miigwech, the vision, and we've talked about the vision for Caldwell First Nation through our Indigenous lens, is to be able to protect the land, is to be able to ensure biodiversity. It's really important for us knowing that the bridge is there too and ongoing, and we are exploding with housing. The vision is to have that green space so that when you come off that bridge and it's really, really hot outside, you can come down and go into the national park and you'll feel it and you'll see it and the water. I see it as I explain it to you, but the vision is for all of us, not just for Caldwell. So I say miigwech.
Thank you for the question. And the vision really is to connect Ojibwe to the last piece that's missing right now onto the Detroit River. From our perspective, from the city's perspective, we have an opportunity to create something that's going to not only make Windsorites proud, but all of Canadians proud for decades to come, not only now, but to continue to improve it throughout the decades. It really would be something 50 years from now, future generations of Canadians would look back and say, they really did something good here. That's our vision.
Yeah, I'll say from the Friends of Ojibwe's perspective, we'd really love to see a solution that represents our community and it's very collaborative with all parties working together on something that we can be proud of as a community, something that protects ultimate legislation for protecting of endangered species of the ecosystems, and really something that's as expansive as possible, that provides a large footprint that really protects corridors and allows for the protection of species. So we'd really just love to see something, again, just to reinforce what's been said, something the community could be proud of, something that's legislated and ensures optimal protection for ecological integrity, and then certainly something as well that provides as wide a footprint as possible, because we want to protect as many lands as we can. So thank you very much for the question.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I'm actually going to quote a young person that I know who, when he was sitting in about 8 or 9, sitting in Rouge National Urban Park, and the meadow sort of going around him, said, "It's so quiet here. It's so quiet here." And he didn't have a screen in front of him, didn't have anything that he was playing with, and just the ability to absorb the quiet and appreciate the species that are there. And that is surrounded by development. It's got the 401 running through it. And so my vision and my hope is that Windsor has this great a jewel, And I think that my experience with the Windsor process is that everybody starts to stand up and come to the table and want to make this the gem that it can be. It's just an incredible parcel of land. I've walked various parcels. That shoreline is amazing. And we also have American friends who have come to see it, and they are looking with great hope for Rouge National Urban Park to be created. They see it as a sanctuary for birds. So that's my vision, and that's my hope for Windsor.
Thank you, and that takes us right up to 4 minutes. So that was a nice wrap up. Thank you, Ms. Thompson, and to all the witnesses who shared their perspective on this project. And thank you to Mr. Massé. And we'll be doing clause by clause on November 15th. On November 1st, we dive into Bill C-226 on environmental racism, and we'll go on with that and then come back to this bill on November 15th. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and thank you again for participating.